Welcome to the Dream Novel channel. Before starting to listen to the fun in this clip, don't forget to like and comment, so that the admin will have the encouragement to continue making clips. Let's go listen. Channel Dream Novel. Chapter 131, Ron's wand. Chris and Diana had been called to the ministry unexpectedly, so Kyle ended up having lunch at the Weasley residence. Mrs. Weasley, who hadn't seen him for over 2 weeks, was delighted to have him over and insisted on piling his plate high with 7 or 8 sausages and filling his bowl 3 times with rice. By the end of the meal, Kyle was too full to move. "Fancy helping us degenome the garden?" Fred asked enthusiastically. "We're official Quidditch beaters now, so we can definitely beat you at it." "Maybe next time," Kyle replied, shaking his head as he pulled a yellow envelope from his pocket. "I've got to head to Diagon Alley to pick up supplies for the new semester." "Oh, that's right, you haven't gotten your school things yet," Mrs. Weasley exclaimed, bustling over from the kitchen. "Just a moment, dear. We'll come along with you." "No need, Mrs. Weasley," Kyle said with a smile. "Most of the second-year supplies are the same as the first year's. I only need a few things like parchment and ink, so I'll be back quickly." Mrs. Weasley hesitated, glancing at him with slight concern. "It's fine, Mum," Fred reassured her. "We'll go with him." "Yes, Mum," George added. "We'll make sure he's all set." "All right, then," Mrs. Weasley relented. But she shot the twins a warning look. "Come straight back once you're done, and don't go wandering into any shady places with Kyle." Fred gasped, feigning shock. "Shady places? Mom, you know nothing about us." "To be honest, it's as if you hardly know us at all," George chimed in, putting on a look of injured innocence. While the twins were talking to Mrs. Weasley, Kyle suddenly noticed Ron sitting nearby, and the wand he kept holding in his hand. He had seen this wand last semester at Charlie's, and it was very worn, with even the unicorn hair exposed. Kyle suddenly remembered something and looked up, saying, "Mrs. Weasley, you've misunderstood Fred and George." The twins nodded vigorously at Kyle's words, giving a silent thumbs up behind their backs. But Kyle, acting as if he hadn't seen their gesture, continued, "They followed me to Diagon Alley because they actually wanted to buy Ron a new wand." Fred and George nodded halfway through, then suddenly froze, turning to look at Kyle in disbelief. Ron, who was sitting nearby, was also stunned. "Merlin, Fred and George want to buy me a new wand?" Ron thought, hardly able to believe what he was hearing. But then, a wave of elation washed over him. He wanted a new wand so badly that he had even been dreaming of shopping for one at Ollivander's over the past few days. Unfortunately, despite the family's recent increase in wealth, Mrs. Weasley had refused to let him buy a new wand, insisting that the galleons belonged to the twins and she was merely holding them for safekeeping. Unexpectedly, Ron looked at his 2 brothers with red-rimmed eyes, his face brimming with emotion, as if he might burst into tears at any moment. Fred and George, meanwhile, looked utterly dazed. When had they ever said they'd buy Ron a new wand? Wasn't this a pure waste of galleons? Ron was only in his first year, surely he could make do with Charlie's old wand. However, out of trust in Kyle, the twins hesitated and refrained from contradicting him. Yes, Mum," said Fred, gritting his teeth. "We did want to get Ron a new wand." George took a deep breath and forced a dry smile. "We just didn't say anything because we were afraid you'd object." "My dear, why would I object?" Mrs. Weasley's eyes grew a bit misty as she stepped forward and hugged Fred and George warmly. "I'm so glad you feel that way. George is right, I don't know you nearly as well as I should." "I'm Fred, Mum," George corrected, blushing slightly. "You've got us wrong again." "I'm sorry, Fred, dear," said Mrs. Weasley, releasing him and smiling. "By the way, would you wait a moment?" With that, she went upstairs. The twins immediately turned to Kyle, their expressions full of confusion. Kyle shook his head imperceptibly, signaling for patience. Soon, Mrs. Weasley returned, holding a small bag. "Here are your galleons," she said, handing it to George, who was closest to her. "I was worried you were still too young and might spend all your galleons in a hurry, but now it seems you've really grown up. Take it, you can't buy a wand without it." George couldn't resist opening the bag and found nearly 30 golden galleons inside. A flicker of disappointment crossed the twins' faces. They had expected all the galleons, not just 30. Mrs. Weasley immediately caught on to George's expression and said sternly, "What, not enough? Forget it, then." She made as if to take the bag back. George stepped back quickly, shaking his head. "Of course not, Mum, how could we possibly say that's not enough?" As if afraid she might change her mind, George walked straight up to the fireplace, clutching the bag with one hand and a handful of Floo powder with the other. "We're running out of time, we have to go." With that, he threw the Floo powder into the fireplace and stepped in. "Diagon Alley," he announced, vanishing in a whirl of green flames. In a flash, Fred and Kyle followed right behind him. When Kyle opened his eyes again, he found himself standing in front of the fireplace in the leaky cauldron. Fred and George flanked him on either side, both speaking in hurried, indignant whispers. "When did we say we were going to buy Ron a wand?" Fred hissed. "We need an explanation, Kyle," George added, his face pinched with disbelief. 7 galleons for a wand, that's enough to buy 100 fat-lipped toffees. Calm down. But aren't you at least a bit curious? Kyle said, leaning in conspiratorially. Have you ever wondered why Ollivander's wand shop is so messy? The twins exchanged a quick glance, their initial irritation slowly giving way to intrigue. Kyle leaned closer and whispered something into their ears. As they listened, their eyes began to gleam with interest, though a trace of doubt lingered. Fred frowned, still hesitant. But 7 galleons for a wand. Isn't that a bit of a waste? Don't worry about it, Kyle replied with a grin. I'll cover the cost, as a going-away present for Ron. Puff. Just as Kyle finished speaking, a rotund figure tumbled out of the fireplace, landing in a cloud of soot. Ron picked himself up, ignoring the dust clinging to his clothes, and scanned the room anxiously. His face brightened with relief when he spotted Kyle and the twins standing nearby, and he jogged over with an eager smile. Channel Dream Novel. Chapter 132, Teaming Up to Deceive, You said you were going to buy me a new wand. Ron's gaze shifted between Fred and George, his eyes a mixture of hope and worry. After his initial excitement, a nagging fear crept in. What if this was just another one of their pranks? After all, Fred and George had pulled stunts like this before. It wouldn't be the first time. Of course, my dear brother, Fred said with a grin, clapping Ron on the shoulder. Do you doubt your own flesh and blood? Beside him, George put on a pained expression. Ron, you're breaking our hearts. I'm sorry. I didn't mean it like that. Ron's face turned crimson, and he stammered, I got a bit nervous. No, not nervous. I have complete faith in you, really, Don't worry, Ron, Kyle said with a reassuring smile. They're not joking this time. You will definitely get a new wand today, I promise. Ron let out a sigh, visibly relaxing. Normally, he wouldn't be this jumpy. Well, maybe just a little. But when it came down to trust, he found Kyle more reliable than his mischievous brothers. Thank you, Kyle, Ron said, some of the redness finally fading from his cheeks. His nerves still showed, but at least he looked a bit more at ease. Fred and George, however, looked decidedly unimpressed. Why are you thanking Kyle? Fred asked, raising an eyebrow. Guess you still don't trust us, George added. Ron started to feel nervous again. No, it's not that. Thank you too, he mumbled, glancing at his brothers. Fred and George exchanged satisfied nods. With that settled, the 4 of them left the chaotic leaky cauldron and headed toward Diagon Alley. As they approached the entrance, Kyle, who was lagging behind on purpose, extended his leg to kick a rubbish bin out of the way. Thud. The bin didn't budge an inch. Huh? Kyle turned, examining the bin more closely. To his annoyance, he saw that the bottom had been glued to the ground with a fixing charm. It must have been old Tom. Kyle's face darkened. How could he do this? Just last year, he said he trusted me, and now he's glued the trash can down. The more Kyle thought about it, the more his irritation grew. Glancing at his friends to make sure they weren't watching, he quickly pulled out his wand and pointed it at the bin. Engorgo. The bin expanded slightly, growing about the thickness of a brick taller. Satisfied, Kyle stashed his wand and caught up with the Weasleys. George glanced at him curiously. What were you doing back there? Why so slow? Kyle shrugged casually. Oh, I accidentally dropped a sickle earlier. Found it? Yes, found it. George nodded, not thinking much of it. Their destination was clear, and they headed straight for Ollivanders. Ron led the way, looking excited, while Kyle and the twins trailed slightly behind, whispering amongst themselves. What do you think would happen if we just walked off right now? Fred muttered with a grin. Little Ron would collapse, George replied with a chuckle, and Mum would tan our hides. Not to mention, Kyle added with a smirk, you wouldn't be able to keep those 30 galleons. Fine, fine, forget it, Fred shrugged. For the sake of galleons. Ron, walking ahead, seemed to catch a snippet of their conversation. He glanced back quickly, then relaxed when he saw they were still there. By the way, do you actually have a plan? George asked in a low voice once Ron turned back around. Little Ron might not be a genius, but he wouldn't ask about Ollivanders for no reason. Fred nodded thoughtfully. Yeah, he's probably so caught up in getting a new wand that he wouldn't even notice if Ollivanders was covered in dirt. If he doesn't ask, we can give him a little nudge, Kyle suggested, stroking his chin as he whispered. Fred frowned, uncertain. You think he'll go for it? Worth a shot, Kyle replied with a shrug. Even if he doesn't, I'm just curious, doesn't have to work out perfectly. TSK, your curiosity comes with a price tag, you know, George snorted. 7 whole galleons. Kyle just smiled, saying nothing. Ollivanders was just around the corner. As the group reached the small, shabby shop, Ron's eyes shone with excitement. He moved toward the door eagerly, but Fred stepped in front, head down, as if lost in thought. Careful, Fred. Ron warned, you're going the wrong way, that's not the door. Bang! Before Ron could finish, Fred walked straight into the shop's grimy window. Oh, for Merlin's sake. Why is this shop so dirty? Fred muttered, brushing the dust off his new robes, clearly annoyed. Knew I shouldn't have worn these today, they're brand new. George hurried over to help, patting at the robes, but the dust only seemed to settle in deeper. Fred, you're so careless, George teased. Mum's definitely going to scold you when she sees this. There's nothing I can do. This place feels like it hasn't been cleaned in centuries, Kyle added, coming over with a serious expression. But you know, you could ask Ollivander for compensation. My roommate Mikkel once got his robes filthy at the pet shop, and they gave him an extra bag of pet food to make up for it. Unfortunately, we're not here to buy wands ourselves, Fred replied with a disappointed sigh. Otherwise, I'd be asking Ollivander for a free wand maintenance kit. Yeah, what a shame, George chimed in, shaking his head. Those maintenance kits go for 7 sickles each. Nothing to be done about it, I suppose, Fred sighed. Anyway, let's just get Ron inside. Right. George nodded, pulling open the door to Ollivander's and stepping in. Come on, Ron. Ron, who seemed lost in thought, snapped back at George's call and hurried over. Kyle noticed that as he walked through the doorway, Ron rubbed his robes deliberately against the frame, as if hoping to pick up some dust. Once they'd gone inside, Fred turned to Kyle eagerly. So, do you think he fell for it? Kyle grinned. Looks like it. He pulled out his wand and pointed it at Fred's robe. Scourgify. With a swift flick of his wand, the dust vanished instantly from Fred's robes. Channel Dream Novel. Chapter 133, Professor Snape, are you taking the kids shopping? Ah, a cleaning charm, Fred muttered, eyeing his freshly cleaned robe with a resigned sigh. Mom has to use it almost 3 times a day. How come Ron can't remember it? Kyle shrugged. Who knows? Kyle's plan had been cobbled together on the spot and was riddled with potential pitfalls. The biggest issue was the cleaning charm itself, which Fred and George believed was precisely why Ron wouldn't fall for the scheme. In a wizarding household, this spell was among the most commonly used, and they couldn't imagine Ron being unaware of it. Kyle had thought the same thing. In fact, when he'd noticed Ron's suspicious glances back at the leaky cauldron, he'd already started considering letting him off the hook. But since he'd come this far, backing out now felt wrong. Instead, he made the scheme as straightforward as possible for Ron. After all, he could have simply told Ron to ask about it. With Ron's eagerness to get a new wand, he wouldn't have refused. Kyle's plan was simple. All Ron had to do was say, "Why don't you just use a cleaning charm?" At that point, Kyle would have admitted to the ruse and bought him the wand. But, Ron didn't say it. Not only that, he actually fell for the ploy. It was unbelievable. Ollivander seems to be away, Fred noted, raising an eyebrow. Let's head in soon, I can't wait to see the show. Are you sure that's fair? Kyle teased. Ron is your brother, after all. Fred smirked mischievously. Thanks for the reminder, I almost forgot. He swung open the shop door and stepped inside. Kyle moved to follow, but he suddenly spotted a familiar figure around the corner. A black cloak hung dramatically, defying the windless air, greasy hair gleaming faintly as sharp eyes scanned the surroundings like a large bat stalking the shadows. The figure stood out, a jarring contrast to the bustling crowd. And behind him, barely visible, was a pair of short, stubby legs, partially hidden by the sweeping cloak. Long time no see, Professor Snape, Kyle greeted, stepping forward. What a coincidence, out shopping with your daughter, oh, it's Conna. Only as he got closer did Kyle realize that it was Conna following Snape. Snape's eyes narrowed, his expression twisting as if he'd just swallowed a dung bomb, his face darkening in an instant. Don't be ridiculous, Kyle, Conna said, poking her head out from behind Snape. Uncle Snape hasn't, silence, Conna. Snape snapped, cutting her off. Kyle's gaze flickered with curiosity at the change in Conna's address to Snape. But before he could dwell on it, Snape spoke up, a hint of sarcasm in his voice. What brings you here to Ollivander's? Did your wand break? No, Professor. I take very good care of my wand. Kyle's expression remained calm as he replied. I'm here with Fred and George to help their younger brother buy a new wand. Ron Weasley, he's starting at Hogwarts this year. Snape's face fell slightly, showing mild disappointment. And I thought I'd pick up a few potion ingredients too, Kyle added with a polite smile. I can't wait to attend your potions class. Snape let out a short, derisive noise. His expression soured even further, as though he'd swallowed another dung bomb, but he merely shot Kyle a contemplative look and held back any further remarks. Come along, Conna, he said shortly. Without another glance at Kyle, Snape turned and continued walking. Conna hesitated, clearly wanting to linger. So much had happened around her that summer, more excitement packed into 2 months than in her past 2 years combined. She longed to share it all with Kyle. But Snape had other ideas. He shot Kyle a look of deep distaste, grabbed Conna firmly by the collar, and marched her away, despite her gesturing protests. Don't associate with Kyle in the future, he muttered, making no effort to hide his words. He's a bad influence. Kyle watched as they disappeared into the Crucible shop. He then turned and entered Ollivander's wand shop, thinking he might have missed the best part of the show thanks to Snape's interruption. However, as soon as he stepped inside, he heard Ollivander's voice, sounding rather exasperated. "We don't include wand maintenance kits with the wands, young man. You have to purchase those separately." And I'd have thought a Weasley would know the cleaning charm by now. By this point, the dust that Ron had purposely smeared on his arm had disappeared. He stood there, his face flushed red, staring down at the floor as if he were searching for a crack to crawl into. "As for why I don't clean the shop." Ollivander paused, his face growing stern. "It's for the ash balance. Dust can insulate the magic, protecting the wands from external disturbances. It's a delicate art, understood only by us wand makers. You wouldn't comprehend it even if I tried to explain. So, which hand do you use to hold your wand?" Ollivander prompted. Ron extended his right hand, trembling slightly. A tape measure promptly floated over the counter and began to measure him in quick, sharp movements. Fred and George, standing nearby, had both lowered their heads, hands pressed to their stomachs, shaking with barely restrained laughter. If Ollivander weren't present, they likely would have burst out. Once the measuring was complete, Ron moved on to trying out different wands, but the process did not go smoothly. By the time he reached the 7th, or perhaps it was the 8th, wand, it rejected him so forcefully that the moment he picked it up, a jet of water shot from its tip, drenching him from head to toe. Now thoroughly soaked and shivering in the cool air, Ron stood there, looking more miserable than ever. An hour later, the stack of boxes on the counter had grown into a small mountain. George and Kyle were slumped nearby, playing a lackluster game of wizard chess, while Fred watched and occasionally threw in his opinions, though neither of them paid him any mind. "An excellent choice," came Ollivander's voice at last. 14 inches, willow, with a unicorn hair core. "It suits you perfectly, Mr. Weasley. That'll be 7 galleons. Finally finished?" Kyle perked up and stood, which immediately earned an indignant look from George. "Hey, I was about to win." Ignoring him, Kyle pulled out his wallet and grabbed a handful of galleons. But just as he was about to hand them over, Fred slung an arm around his shoulder with a mischievous grin. "Kyle, you sure you don't need anything else?" he asked. George quickly stepped forward and handed Ollivander the 7 galleons himself. "Next year, Ginny's going to need a new wand too, or at least a new robe from one of us," Fred added with a wink. Kyle laughed. "Not feeling the pinch now?" "Oh, I felt it all right," Fred sighed. "Especially since Ron's so stupid, it almost feels like a waste giving him a new wand." After they left Ollivander's, the whole group stretched simultaneously, easing the stiffness from standing around for so long. "Kyle, we really need to hurry," Fred said. "Mum's probably already getting impatient. Any later, and she might come down here to find us." "What else do you need to buy?" George asked. "Just some parchment," Kyle replied, "and a bottle of Sleekeasy's hair potion." Channel Dream Novel. Chapter 134, The New Student Asking for Directions. After returning from Diagon Alley, Kyle put his worries aside and enjoyed the last stretch of his holiday, eagerly testing out his new broom. Finally, after a year, he had his own. It wasn't the outdated Nimbus 1700 or a budget clean sweep model, but the Nimbus 2000, a sleek, cutting-edge broom that had only been on the market for a month and was already a sensation across the wizarding world. The Nimbus 2000 was a birthday gift from Diana and Chris, though Kyle had only recently retrieved it from his room, where it had waited for him during his stay in Dorset. And as soon as he took it for a flight, he could see why professional teams had scrambled to acquire it. Fast, stable, and extraordinarily responsive, it moved with a mere touch, shifting smoothly in whatever direction he needed. With the Nimbus 2000, Kyle even managed to beat the Weasley twins in the St. Catchpole Village Quidditch tournament, despite being outnumbered 2-1. On the second day, Cedric finally returned from France and eagerly joined Kyle's team. Now it was 2 against 2. Needless to say, Fred and George suffered an inevitable defeat. "This isn't fair." George groaned, eyeing the old clean sweep in his hands. "The broom difference is just too big. If we had a Nimbus 2000, or even a Nimbus 1500, you wouldn't stand a chance. That's not the main problem, George, Fred said, patting his twin on the shoulder. We're starting school soon, and this year, Kyle will definitely be on the Hufflepuff Quidditch team. Not exactly good news for us Gryffindors. Yeah, you're right. George slumped onto the ground, visibly deflated. He understood all too well what Fred meant. With Kyle on board, Hufflepuff's team could easily maintain its strength. But Gryffindor faced a different situation. With Charlie's graduation, they had struggled to find a skilled seeker to take his place. The seeker position was unique, it required extraordinary talent, a rare quality not easily found. Cedric, for example, had shown exceptional promise as early as his second year, a rare case even in all of Hogwarts. Lee Jordan had some potential, though not at Cedric's level. But Lee was set on becoming a Quidditch commentator, leaving Gryffindor without a replacement seeker. Sharing a glance, Fred and George let out a mutual sigh, resigned to the challenges that lay ahead. And with that, summer vacation sped by in no time. On September 1st, Mr. Weasley was once again there to see them off to King's Cross Station. Amid the bustling platform, Kyle cast a few glances around, as if searching for someone specific. He hadn't spotted any bespectacled boys, though. Had he come at the wrong time? He wondered for a moment, then dismissed the thought. Just then, Mrs. Weasley spoke up. "All right, now, which platform is it?" 9 3/4. Ginny answered eagerly before anyone else. "Mum, can I go?" "You're still too young, Ginny." "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," Mrs. Weasley chided gently before glancing to her side. "Percy, you go first." Percy gave a curt nod and strode confidently toward the platform entrance, disappearing without a word. "Kyle, your turn." Kyle nodded and followed them onto the platform, which was already bustling with people. Groups of friends had gathered, chatting in clusters about their summer adventures. "Sorry, Kyle," Percy, who was leading the way, turned back to him. "I need to head to the prefect's compartment right away." Prefects are responsible for maintaining order on the train, and there's plenty of preparation to do. As he spoke, he adjusted the gold and red badge pinned to his chest with a touch of pride. Percy had achieved his ambition of becoming a Gryffindor prefect, and he'd been talking about it non-stop for weeks. "Of course, go ahead," Kyle replied. "I'll wait here for Fred and George." "See you at school," Percy said, giving his badge one last polish before heading off toward the train with his luggage in tow. Kyle waited, glancing around the platform. For some reason, Fred and George were taking longer than expected. When they finally appeared, Fred had a broad grin on his face. "We got delayed by a young witch who was completely lost," he explained. "Right after you and Percy went through, Mum spotted her asking a muggle where platform 9 3/4 was. George added, she was absolutely insistent. Kept saying there had to be a platform with a 9 on it." The muggle was livid, Fred chuckled. "When we came through, he was muttering about people wasting his time. A young girl asking for platform 9 3/4. Kyle's mind paused, wondering if Harry Potter could be here too. But just then, 2 more people entered the platform, one after the other. The first was a man who looked about the same age as Chris. He wore a well-tailored dark suit, his hair meticulously styled, and he surveyed the platform with curiosity, finally settling his gaze on the gleaming red Hogwarts Express. A girl followed him, dragging a large suitcase behind her. She had a mane of thick, slightly untidy brown hair. The moment he saw her, the man held out his hand. "Here, dear, let me take your case." "No, Dad, I'm fine," she replied, shaking her head. "I cast a spell on it before we left. It's not as heavy as it looks. I mean, I did pack all my textbooks in here." "Yes, Hermione, but..." The man glanced at the suitcase, clearly unconvinced. After all, he'd carried it down the stairs at King's Cross, and from the weight of it, it didn't seem her spell had lightened it much. "Just a sec, Dad." At that, The girl noticed Kyle and the twins nearby. She walked over and smiled at Fred and George. "Thanks for helping me find the platform." "You're welcome," Fred replied with a grin. "No problem at all," George added, shrugging as if it were nothing. "No, really, if you hadn't helped, I'd probably still be wandering around," the girl insisted, shaking her head. "I've memorized all my textbooks, but there's no mention anywhere about how to find the platform. Anyway, I'm Hermione Granger." "What are your names?" "Fred Weasley." "And George Weasley." Channel Dream Novel. Chapter 135, Wealthy Snape. The new student, Hermione, soon left with her father. As soon as she was gone, Fred pulled a strange face. "She finished all her textbooks." "Yes, Fred, you heard right," George said with a smirk. "We've just met another Percy." Percy had also completed all his textbooks before starting school, which earned him a reward from Mrs. Weasley, a brand new set of robes. "What house do you think she'll be sorted into?" George wondered aloud. Fred raised an eyebrow. "Isn't it obvious? Ravenclaw, of course." "I think so too." "No, I think it'll be Gryffindor." Kyle, who had been quiet until then, spoke up. "Don't forget, Percy's in Gryffindor." "That's different, Kyle," Fred shook his head. "Our whole family's in Gryffindor." George added, "In fact, we think Percy would prefer to be in Ravenclaw, but the Sorting Hat placed him in Gryffindor." Kyle rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "Why don't we make a bet?" At the word bet, Fred and George immediately perked up. "What's the wager?" "A galleon, maybe?" Kyle suggested, taking a gold coin and twirling it between his fingers. "If she's sorted into Ravenclaw, I'll owe each of you a galleon." Fred and George exchanged a quick glance. They soon reached an agreement. Fred gave Kyle a mischievous grin. "That's a bit tame, let's make it more interesting." "How about we bet on this?" George pulled out a toffee from his pocket. "If that girl ends up in Ravenclaw, you'll have to eat this Tuntung toffee at the opening banquet." "Are you sure?" Kyle's expression turned a little odd. "And if she's sorted into Gryffindor?" "Then we'll eat it," the twins replied in unison. Kyle's expression grew even stranger. He stifled a laugh as he took the toffee from George. "Tisk, fine. Deal." Fred and George extended their hands. "It's a deal." "It's a deal," Kyle said, shaking hands with them. He had just been looking to make a bit of pocket money, but since Fred and George were so keen, he didn't mind letting the twins add a twist to the fun. After they shook on it, they shared a sly grin, and none of them brought it up again. Kyle glanced over at the platform entrance and asked curiously, "It's been a while now, why haven't Ron and Mrs. Weasley come through yet?" "Not sure," Fred replied. "Maybe they ran into some lost first years." "That happens all the time at King's Cross," George added, looking toward the train. "Forget it, let's get on board." Lee Jordan wrote earlier that he's got a huge tarantula as a pet. Have either of you spotted him yet? Speaking of pets. Kyle's eyes drifted to the unremarkable-looking box he was holding. Newt's reply had come in just that afternoon, and he'd agreed to let Kyle adopt a Niffler. Now, Niffler was in the box, and Kyle had even given him a fitting name, Jerry. After boarding the train, Fred and George quickly disappeared in search of Lee Jordan, while Kyle hauled the luggage toward the back. He hadn't gone far when a compartment door nearby slid open, and a small head peeked out. "Kyle, over here." Kanna waved. Kyle hurried over, and as soon as he entered, Kanna closed the compartment door eagerly. Eyeing her cautiously, Kyle instinctively took 2 steps back. "What do you want?" "I want to tell you something." Kanna didn't seem to notice Kyle's wariness. After shutting the door, she said excitedly, "Guess what? Professor Snape is actually related to me." "Yeah, I know." Kanna blinked, stunned. You knew?" Kyle laughed. "Yep. I also know that Professor Snape's mother's last name was Prince. Kanna's entire expression froze as if she'd gone numb. This didn't make sense, this wasn't how she expected things to go. Shouldn't Kyle have been shocked? Yet here he was, just, amused. Her mouth opened slightly, and she asked in disbelief, "How do you know?" "My dad told me," Kyle said, lifting the suitcase onto the shelf. He was in school with Professor Snape and happened to know a bit about it. Chris had, in fact, told him during a visit just before the holidays. Kyle had only asked on a whim, not expecting Chris to actually know. Kanna frowned. "Then why didn't you tell me sooner?" Kyle raised an eyebrow. "Would you have believed me if I had?" Kanna hesitated, feeling a pang of frustration. Before what happened over the summer, she probably wouldn't have believed something so far-fetched. "Oh, right." Suddenly recalling something, Kanna asked suspiciously, "Did Professor Snape come to see me because of you?" Kyle didn't deny it. "You were paid to help me, so what was the deal? Were the problems solved?" Kyle had written to Snape on the first day of the holiday, detailing Kanna's situation. Though he'd added a few dramatic touches, the account was mostly accurate. "Yes, it was taken care of," Kanna said, giving Kyle a pointed look. "The day after the holiday started, Professor Snape came to my house, introduced himself, and took me to Gringotts." Kyle, in the middle of digging through his snacks, paused. "What did he take you to Gringotts for?" "He asked the goblins to repossess our old vault and transfer its contents to his vault." "Wait. Are you saying Snape took everything from your vault and moved it to his?" The more Kyle listened, the stranger it sounded. What was Snape up to? Afraid someone else might take it, so he took it all himself. Picking up on Kyle's thoughts, Kanna hurried to explain. "He didn't take it for himself, he's just holding it for me." Kyle rolled his eyes. "Yeah, I've heard that one before. Who'd actually believe it?" "It's true," Kanna insisted seriously. "There wasn't much left in our vault anyway. The only thing valuable was probably the deed to our land. And Professor Snape has loads of galleons, he doesn't need to lie to me." "I hope so." Kyle sighed. "Besides that, did he do anything else?" "He bought the house next to ours and stayed there all summer." Kanna couldn't help but smile at the memory. "For 2 months, he chased off anyone who tried to visit. Snape bought the place next door." Kyle's mouth twitched. Okay, he admitted to himself, maybe his initial suspicions were a little off. Now the fun in this clip is over. Which listeners haven't liked and commented yet? You can press like and comment to encourage the admin find the fun in the next clip. May the listeners be happy forever.